Corners and edges and the middles take care of themselves.
All of our food comes in on trucks. I mean, wherever you live, 90% of your food's coming in off a truck coming through a grocery store. That's not a tenable situation. There's all kinds of things wrong with that. That's treadmills running on eggshells. You know, that's more and more to get less and less, and the whole thing's getting more and more fragile. So we've got to create an indigenous local food supply. And in my experiment that I did in Backyard Sustainability, we tried to look at that. What is the nature of a backyard food supply? And what I found out was it's not an individual thing, it's a group thing. You can't have a local food supply by yourself. Local food supply has to be done with other people. The only way to get at it is to feed one another. And that's what I teach.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. In the summer of 2006, I visited Scott McGuire in his yard in Ashland for his experiment in, now give me the right title.
An experiment in backyard sustainability.
And the question you asked, and so here we are with Scott again, your experiment was to find out, could you grow enough food, and it was a rental yard, house and yard, so could you grow enough to...
How much food could we actually grow in that backyard to feed my family?
Okay, so I want to know, and our visitors and our viewers want to know.
How'd that work?
How'd it work out?
Yeah, well, it worked out great. We learned a lot of different things, especially about the grains, which I'd never had grown any of the wheat or the oats before. Well, here are some grains that I'm growing this year.
Okay.
This is some wheat, some spring wheat. I planted this earlier this spring, but I've never grown wheat. I have no idea. I know we have to thresh it and do all kinds of different processes with it. So this is part of the grand experiment. And we got a couple of quart jars. I mean, it doesn't sound like very much, but we had some great pancakes and a few good loaves of bread. Okay. And we realized just how much land you actually need to grow the cereals, to grow the grains.
Let me back up. About how big was that yard? So look back to that.
I want to call it a third of an acre.
Okay.
It wasn't quite half an acre.
And you were growing vegetables?
Mostly vegetables,
and a couple of fruit trees, a few chickens, flowers, herbs.
Yeah. Flowers, herbs, yeah. It was mainly annual culture. It was all annual vegetables because it's a rental. I'd love to grow a lot of fruit trees, but I'm not going to be able to take them with me. So I draw the line at raspberries because I can dig up raspberries and take them with me.
Okay, so back to the grains. Now, you got a couple quart jars.
The grains did well, but you know, the whole experiment was also to see what is a food supply. What does it take to actually have a food supply in a community? And I got a lot of letters from people asking me, well, did you do it? Were you able to grow 100% of your food supply? And show me who's doing it. Who is the person who can grow 100% of their food in their backyard? And I try to explain to them it's the wrong framing of the question. And here's why. Say I want to grow 100% of my family's broccoli. Okay, and say we love broccoli, so I'm going to grow 50 plants of broccoli, right? Do I sow 50 seeds? No, because some's going to be a dud, some going to be small and runty and curled, and so I'll sow 60 to 70 seeds of broccoli to hopefully get 50 nice plants. So we have our supply of broccoli, call it that. And of course, this has to apply to all the different things you eat, to do this little exercise. But look what happens. If I sowed 60 or 70 seeds of broccoli, I'm not going to just end up with 50 plants. I'm going to end up with 55, 60, 65. I'm going to end up with a little bit extra. With plants, you have to build in buffer all the time. So I'm always going to have too many of something, just so I have enough of the something. Right? Now with the too much of everything that I grow, what do I do with that? I trade that with the person who hunts, the person who fishes, the person who grows the thing I don't have. You see, community supply is not an individual project. It's a community project.
And that's part of it. It's not about self-sufficiency at the family level.
Self is not the sufficiency level. It's somehow the neighborhood, community, tribal grouping level is where food supply is resilient. And we don't know this because we're still thinking in consumer mind. We're not in producer mind. We're still in my job, my bank account, my wallet, my grocery store, my toilet paper brand. Right? No, whereas my food supply is our food supply. The way to get there is feed one another.
And there's a broader security in that, of course, not only for food, but for whatever may be needed, you know, that somebody's got the medical skills. Or,
right. And my point is it always has to start with the food supply. I mean, I read a lot of paragraphs with sustainability in there, and if they don't have food supply in the topic sentence, I'm not going to read it anymore, you know, because sustainability is a burned out word. It's not talking about food supply, and to me, food supply, not food. And we don't, our culture doesn't even make that distinction anymore, right? We got food channels, right? We got food obsessions, we got food problems. But what about food supply? Where does it all come from? It's all taken for granted right out of a store. And so the supply part is the part we need to regain traction on. And that was what the experiment was about, was what does it really take to engage local food supply on any level?
Okay, so you got small amounts of grains and other things, so you weren't 100% self-sufficient for your family.
No, not at all, but we had too much of all the things we did grow.
Okay.
So that led us to the conclusion in year 2 or year 3, I think, what are we going to do with all this excess? This is crazy. So that's where we got the idea to do a CSA, a community-supported agriculture setup in our backyard. So we did a mini CSA. You know what farms do with the CSA? I'm sure a lot of your viewers are familiar with that. We had 8 families that year, that summer, that we fed the wide assortment of vegetables, herbs, flowers, and fruits that we were just planting a little bit more. We had enough for 8 families, including ourselves.
Incredible.
Yes.
A little more?
Well, yeah, because of the waste and the excess that you have to have. To have this much, you got to grow this much. And then you end up with this much. It's
wow, I mean, it's an incredible model of abundance. I mean, that sort of counters what...
But it's a group-based model. So if you can't share it, you can't have it. And it's all different than we're used to getting.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah.
That is cool. Okay.
That's our experiment. That's the results.
Thank you, thank you. You got it now. You got the answer to the experiment. It's bigger than you think it is. I mean, it's a broader experiment. So... Bring us up to date. What else are you doing? I mean, we are now not in the same location. So
no, we're not. No. That experiment lasted, well, it was a rental, and we were there for 4 seasons. And we, in our own lives, we wanted to get more into farming and growing food on a bigger level. And sure enough, we got notice because of the turnover of the housing situation. So we found another place. We're at this place now where we're going to be leasing some land to move into farming enterprises. But but the last few years at that rental property in Ashland, I taught a lot of classes. It was not only running the CSA for that last year, but it was also teaching classes because a lot of people really want to learn how to, all these basic skills, the basic plant culture. It's just kind of missing in our background. We don't know how to do these things.
That's true.
And people are really wanting to learn how to do that now.
So you had a very interesting title to your recent class. Tell us.
Yes, I taught a class at the local community college called Eat Your Yard. And Eat Your Yard is pretty much, it describes the transition from ornamental to edible. And most people's yards are ornamental. They're pretty ridiculous. And people are saying, well, if I'm going to spend all this money on water and lawn and shrubs, why shouldn't I be eating fruit here? Why couldn't I be having salads and strawberries? And they can.
So what else do you cover in your classes? I'll bet they're lively.
Yeah, it's a great time. We have a great romp. It's hard to stay on topic, actually, because we start taking off everywhere. But no, it's really, I start out with the nuts and bolts. You know, it's really some basic things. And a lot of people don't understand the basic things. But I also try to reach people who have been gardeners for a while, because anybody who's grown plants for any length of time, they're usually wanting to deepen it. They don't usually say, oh, that's enough. They want to say, oh, I want to grow some of that. And boy, I really want to grow a lot more of those. And so what is it that's going to deepen your relationship with the plant kingdom? That's really the question I'm trying to answer for the class. What is it that's going to deepen it for you? And a lot of people, it's growing more or a different variety of things. But more and more, people are wanting to learn how to get really deep with it, essentially how to talk with it.
How to talk?
How to talk with the garden and the plants themselves. Because, yeah, and this is, the term is co-creative gardening.
Okay.
And it's where I'm really moving towards teaching now. It's the method that I've used all these years, 30 years.
Tell us about this.
Yeah, it's, well, it really got on the modern cultural map at the Findhorn community in the late 60s.
Right.
And a woman in Virginia named Michelle Small Wright at her Paralandra Nature Research Center has really carried that torch and done amazing work with how to basically communicate with the intelligence of the elements in your garden. Because we've come to the conclusion that plants are not little biological mechanisms. They're not little androids, you know, they're beings, they're alive. They have a point of view, they have an understanding of what they need, and we can access that understanding directly as a partnership, as a co-creative effort. We don't have to be doing guesswork in the garden.
It sounds to me like, in a way, you're retrieving some very ancient knowledge that certainly, I mean, I've got to believe that cultures who were based in the plant kingdom knew that. They knew which plants were good for cuts and
Oh, yeah.
all of that.
The amount of knowledge of the plant world that was in indigenous cultures is vast, and a lot of it's really lost. And a lot of the indigenous wisdom from the indigenous cultures were with food supplies that were wild food supplies. A lot of them did cultivation. A lot of native peoples did a lot of different kinds of cultivation. They would grow corn, you know, the Three Sisters in upstate New York, the corn bean squash, the Hopi grew lots of corn. There were cultivation scenarios in many, many different tribes. But we've never been in a position where so many people are so utterly dependent on an industrial food supply that our challenge is really coming up with an indigenous horticulture. Because we have to grow our food now. There's no wild buffalo. There's no wild resources that much. I mean,
the wild salmon are mostly gone.
Ooh, and they're on the edge. We need to bring them back. There's no question. And the buffalo, I believe, will come back. They need, you know, that's how the Great Plains became the Great Plains, and they're not the Great Plains anymore. But we need to develop an indigenous horticulture, a way of growing plants that's really an indigenous farming, an indigenous way of relating to the plant kingdom directly. And that's something that the Findhorn teachings have, and the Paralandra work, the co-creative gardening work. Because you can use muscle testing and different techniques.
Wait a minute, tell us what muscle testing is.
Okay, muscle testing, applied kinesiology, where you can determine a yes or no answer through the applied pressure to your muscles. You know, naturopaths do this, chiropractors, testing for allergies, you know, where you hold your arm out, that sort of thing.
And you're weak,
right, exactly.
You're allergic to.
Exactly, yeah.
You use that with plants?
Yes, those modalities have been really highly developed in the alternative health modes. But not so much in the plant kingdom. But that is exactly what, I've done that for 30 years.
So
Design gardens that way.
Give me an example.
Well, basically the way it works is the whole garden, when you have a co-creative garden, when all the plants in that garden have a say in where they're going to grow. See, it's not just you go here, you go here. I'm not just saying willy-nilly, hey, you all go plant where I want you to grow. I ask the plants, where do you want to grow? And we do this whole system with the map and with muscle testing. And I basically ask every plant, where do you want to be? They design the garden themselves. And when plants design a garden body, they build into the garden body energy meridians, you know, just like ley lines.
Energy meridians.
Yeah, just like acupuncture lines in our bodies, okay? Well, the plants will design energy meridians into a garden body if you let them, if you're involved on that level. And that's a healthy garden, because you can adjust that garden in ways that humans don't understand yet. You see, we have this thing called companion planting, right? Tomatoes love basil and that sort of thing. Well, it's a very rudimentary understanding of what's going on the energy level among plants, within plants in the garden.
So what kinds of things, what kind of interactions do you find with other energy levels? Do you find somebody resists pests more than another because of that? Or, I mean,
This is all, a lot of this has been fleshed out in the biodynamics approach, Rudolf Steiner's work. But I find many of the people who are applying biodynamics are applying Rudolf Steiner's instructions. They're not necessarily engaging their own personal relationship with their gardens, with their places. So that's what I'm talking about.
You're talking about a living relationship.
An actual committee meeting where you sit down with the invisible committee of your garden and do co-creative design work. And it's really all about balance. It's about the balance of the life force in the garden, okay? When life force is out of balance, well then something will appear that we would call a pest, okay? But God didn't create any pests. There's no such thing as a pest. There's an insect population out of balance.
Okay.
Why is that insect population out of balance? Well, trace it back, you'll undoubtedly find human beings throwing it out of balance with some chemical disaster. And that's what we're doing these days on the planet. So how do we remedy that? We have to remedy, humans must remedy the insect imbalances on the planet, because that is the realm from which we will derive a sustainable food supply system. We have to rebalance it with the insects, and that's where the bees come in. Because it's critical. I always say people, the way out of our mess is to deepen our relationship with the plant kingdom.
Yes.
Well, now it's so clear to me that we must also, backyard gardeners, must deepen our relationship with the bees. Because the bees are in trouble. The bees are falling apart, and they're the front lines of the industrial agribusiness system that we eat from that is also in trouble. So we're all in trouble together.
So what I've understood is the bees and the colony disorder.
Colony collapse disorder, yes.
And it's still happening massively?
It's like the AIDS of the bees. People don't understand there are many, many, many different factors causing the bee populations to collapse. But what's going to save the bee populations is what's going to save us. A localized partnership model food supply. And deepening our relationship with the plant kingdom is the gateway towards that. And what I'm realizing is that the bees and our relationship with beehives and bee culture in our own, what's missing in our own backyards is that dimension of the whole package. Bees are critical to our local food supply as anything. So we need to bring bees into our gardens more and more every season.
What I'm hearing is that one relationship, plant kingdom, you're connecting to everything, all of life, right?
Yeah.
I mean, those probably all evolve together. I mean, the birds are going to be part of this.
John Muir and all of the great naturalists talked about that. You pull at one thing and you're going to find it connected to everything else. But we're so disconnected from everything as our culture. Where do we go? Where do we turn? How do we get that back around? So to me, the gateway back to any sort of sane way of life, a good where you're feeding yourselves and your people and you're taking care of each other. Malama, the Hawaiians call that, we take care of each other, malama, and it's the feed one another is that that core motto thing. And I think if we do it with food, we'll come around.
We'll learn it in other ways. I mean, it'll expand to other ways if we feed each other.
Because, but we try to take care of each other in a lot of different ways, and we don't often think of the food itself, the food supply. And where are the seeds for that? And where is the fertility for that? Building fertility is really the biggest chore.
I was going to say that's number one. It seems to me is the soil has been, well, certainly in the agricultural business, it's turned into a chemical sponge. Yes. I mean, when I try to envision how do we turn that around, I can see the only way is small and local and start that, because we're not going to turn Kansas around anytime soon. No.
In fact, turning things around, I don't know if there is a turning around. See, because we're in a very profound predicament. And predicaments they're not problems, they don't have solutions.
Right.
I mean, we have it's a serious predicament we're in. 90% of our food coming in off of trucks. Natural gas supply creating all of the nitrogen that grows everything. When these things fall off, there's peak oil is one thing, peak nitrogen is the one I'm concerned about, because of all the chemical nitrogen that's used to grow the bulk of the food supplies in the world are all directly made from natural gas.
There's our green revolution, hitting the cliff.
All that. As natural gas reserves fall off, and as natural gas reserves become prioritized for heating in winters of cities, say, how are we going to prioritize the remaining reserves of natural gas? Will it be heat, or will it be nitrogen for food? The perennial question, right? Do I eat or do I stay warm?
Or the question of, do I stay warm and they don't get to eat? I mean, that's also a factor here in this culture. The ethanol that took the corn that didn't go to Mexico. I mean, that gets us into the political side.
Sure.
But my question, you're back to the predicament.
Yes.
Here.
The predicament of food supply is pretty gnarly. The truth is, the numbers of people on the planet right now are here because they ate food that was grown with chemical fertilizers come from natural gas. If we had not been able to exploit the supply of natural gas into a supply of nitrogen fertilizer, then we would be limited by the level of nitrogen that could grow crops, which would be from legumes and manures. Okay. But now that we've had this natural gas oil bubble explosion, we've had this food supply, and like any other creature in ecology, we've exploited this food supply. Our population has ballooned. Well, when our food supply crashes, when our natural gas supply, our nitrogen supply crashes, we simply cannot support this number of people on the planet because they all got here by eating nitrogen from natural gas. It's a harsh reality, but there it is. How many people can the planet support? Well, as many as can eat from soil fertility derived from planetary sources, or
plant-based, plants and the animals that process
solar-based sources, or current solar-based sources. Yeah. That's how you say it.
Okay.
Right. Because if you're using ancient sunlight, in any manner, then you're tapping into an ancient energy reserve, and if you're feeding your entire culture off of that,
then you are already in surplus, in excess.
You're already in closeout. We're already in closeout. All these things are happening. So the food supply predicament is going to become acute. Water supplies and fertility supplies go hand in hand all around the world.
You said it earlier when we were talking, that you have to think about what the purpose of a garden is. And
yes,
so
very good.
What does that mean?
Yeah, okay. Nature doesn't make gardens. Humans do. Okay, why do we make a garden? Well, mainly I make a garden because I want to grow these beautiful lilies, or because I want to have this English cottage perennial flowers, or because I want a food supply for my family. I mean, there's a million different reasons. But the reason for a garden being in existence is a crucial part of that garden's identity. Its reason for being is part of it. So we need to be very clear about why we're making our gardens. What are we doing this for? And what I ran into in my last garden was I wanted to do this experiment on the food supply and of course growing food, but I also want it to be a classroom. And now I also want it to be a food supply and a classroom and a CSA because I want to feed all these other people. So there can be many, many layers of purposefulness to a garden. But part of what we need to figure out as human beings is what is the purpose of our gardens and what is the purpose of us on the planet, because they're the same thing right now. A lot of people, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do with ourselves. The jobs are disappearing. The college educations are becoming another debt-loaded dead end. Young people especially are going, what am I going to do? What's left? And so I'm trying to present this hopeful vision, like, well, you can grow food, you can feed people, and there's a tremendous value and worth in growing food for other people to eat, because you're not just feeding them, you're allowing their hopes and dreams to come alive in them. It's in a way, it's a very high calling to feed people, because it's really hard.
It would seem to me that it ought to be one of the highest callings of all, because if we don't have people feeding us, nothing else will happen.
Okay, I'm going to vote for that politician who said, okay, right.
Support our farmers, give them high pay. Forget the CEOs.
Well, yeah, put farmers back in business. The farmers don't exist. The average median of farmers is over 60, huh? How many young people are saying, oh, I think I'm going to go into farming?
How many school vocational counselors say, have you considered farming as a vocation?
And look, I read articles in the New York Times Magazine every other month. My mom sends them to me about how many college-age youngsters, young men and women are quitting college and finding a place to farm. There's urban farmers up in Portland who are just, 40 backyards, and they all have a crop, and they all move them all around.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes, there's some wonderful developments in tender shoots of indigenous horticulture. Yeah, they're shooting up everywhere.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. Well, that's hopeful.
Very much. Yeah, it's true hopeful. See, I find hope in the growing season, in the season itself. I don't find hope in 2012 or 2050. I find, part of being in a plant culture, being a plant-based people, is living your life grounded in the growing season of your place. If the growing season of where you live defines your life, well then that's going to be a pretty rich life, because you're going to be engaged in that place, in that time. And the reality of what that wealth engine of that growth season can produce. You know, the predicament that we're in, it's a closing out of a lot of different things. And the whole growing season time thing is one of the most important ones. Because right now we live in these little boxes of time. We live in minutes, seconds, the digital chop, 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 right?
Mechanical.
And people say, well, when are we going to run out of food? When is this collapse going to happen? You know, everybody's very worried about the future. And I always try to tell people, look, it's not going to happen. The collapse or any of these things aren't going to happen in any given month, any given week, any given year. They're not going to happen in a cubical increment of time. They're going to happen some growing season. Is it going to be this growing season? Or is it going to be next growing season? Or the growing season after that? You see, that's got to be our orientation in time. That's what makes a plant-based people, is where are we in our growing season now?
Yes, yes.
And when we get back into growing season, then we're on our way out of the collapse of that calendar, that whole time system.
So in a sense, we can gauge how well we are reconnecting with what really truly matters when we are all thinking in the time frame of what's the growing season.
Oh, I believe so. If everybody framed their life around the growing season and, oh, the strawberries are ripe, we got to can them. Oh, the corn,
whether or not you're a farmer. I mean, if you're a preserver, if you're a collector, if you're, you know,
well,
not
everybody can be a farmer.
That's right.
But, okay, but I believe that everybody needs to be more involved in their food supply somehow. Involved with the CA. Who's your farmer? Who's your grower?
Yes,
you need to know a grower the same way you know a mechanic or a dentist or whatever, you know. Who is your farmer? Who is your food supply? And it needs to be a whole bunch of different people and not just this grocery store or that one across town.
Scott, I'll be your food preserver. I mean, you're right. It's like, what you do is rebuilding the network. This is wonderful.
It's great work.
You are so inspiring to me.
Good. Oh, thank you.
I mean, we just need Scott's, you know.
Yeah, just duplicate me everywhere.
Maniacal gardener, you call yourself.
That's all right.
All over.
Yeah.
We are in our last 10 seconds.
Oh, this is it.
Tell me the title of your instructional DVD that's coming out.
Backyard Sustainable Gardening with Scott Allen McGuire.
You look for it. It's coming. We'll have a link on our website.
That'll be good.
Thank you for joining me.
Oh,
this is wonderful.
It's always fun. Thank you.
You're watching Peak Moment. We're doing locally reliant living for these challenging times. My guest is Scott Allen McGuire, who's living it. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you.